Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the stars disappear one by one. Each vanishing light meant another world had fallen to the enemy that humanity called the Void Touched. The year was 2387, and mankind was losing the war that had raged for 20 long years. Commander Lisa Bennett walked up to him with a datapad in her hands. Her face showed the same tired look that every human wore these days. The kind of exhaustion that sleep could not fix because it came from watching everything you loved slowly die. "Sir, the latest fleet count is in," she said quietly. "We have 47 ships left. That's all that remains of the Terran Defense Fleet." Jake took the pad and looked at the numbers. 1,000 ships had once protected human space. Now less than 50 remained. Each lost vessel meant thousands of dead crew members and the destruction of another piece of humanity's future. "Any word from the colonies?" he asked. Lisa shook her head. "Titan Station went dark 3 hours ago. Their last message said the shadows were coming through the walls." "That's the same thing we heard from Europa Base and the Mars settlements?" Jake closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered visiting Titan Station 5 years ago, when it was still a thriving mining operation. Families lived there. Children played in the observation domes and watched Saturn's rings spin slowly overhead. Now it was just another empty place in space. The bridge doors opened and Captain Ryan Davis walked in. His uniform was wrinkled and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. He commanded the heavy cruiser use Vigilant, one of the few big ships they had left. "Admiral, we're picking up something on the long-range sensors," Ryan said. "There's a massive distortion moving in from beyond Pluto. It's bigger than anything we've seen before." Jake felt his stomach drop. They had hoped the enemy would take time to digest the outer colonies before coming for Earth. Apparently they were wrong. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Maybe 6 hours before they reach the outer defense grid. 12 hours before they get to Earth." Jake nodded and turned to Lisa. "Send a priority message to all ship commanders. Emergency fleet conference in 1 hour. We need to discuss our final strategy." As Lisa left to send the message, Jake looked out at the few dozen ships that floated near the Defiance. These vessels and their crews were all that stood between the Void Touched and humanity's home world. It didn't seem like enough, but it would have to be. Dr. Helen Clark arrived on the bridge carrying a portable computer. She was the fleet's chief scientist and had spent the last 2 years studying the enemy. Her research was humanity's only hope of understanding what they faced. "Admiral, I have new data about the Void Touched," she said. "I think I know what they really are." Jake turned to face her. "Tell me." Helen activated her computer and showed him a 3-dimensional image of dark, flowing shapes. "They're not from our universe. They come from the empty space between galaxies where no stars shine. They feed on organized energy and complex thought patterns. That's why they're drawn to civilized worlds." "How do we fight something like that?" Jake asked. "Our weapons don't work because they just absorb the energy and use it to grow stronger. But I've been studying human brain patterns, and I think we have something they can't handle." "What's that?" "Human consciousness has a unique quantum signature. When we think and feel together, we create interference patterns that disrupt their feeding process. That's why humanity has lasted longer than other species they've encountered." Jake looked at the approaching darkness on the sensor display. "Can we use this knowledge to fight them?" Helen nodded. "I'm working on a way to synchronize the neural patterns of our entire fleet. If we can get every human mind working together, we might be able to create a resonance field that could push them back." "How long do you need?" "I don't know. The theory is solid, but building the equipment will take time we may not have." Jake made his decision. "You'll have whatever resources you need. Ryan, I want the Vigilant and every available ship to start delaying actions. We need to buy Helen time to finish her work." The hour passed quickly, and soon the bridge was crowded with ship commanders who had come aboard via shuttle. Jake looked at their faces and saw the same mixture of fear and determination that he felt. These people had lost friends, family, and entire worlds to the enemy. They had every reason to run away, but they were still here. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake began, "this may be our last battle. The enemy has found Earth, and they're coming in force. But I want you to remember something. Humanity has never surrendered, not even when the odds were impossible. We've always found a way to fight back." He looked around the room at the tired faces of his commanders. "Dr. Clark has a plan that might work, but we need to buy her time. That means we're going to have to hold the line against an enemy that outnumbers us 1,000 to 1. Captain Nicole Murphy of the carrier UES Liberty raised her hand. "What about the civilians on Earth?" "They're counting on us," Jake replied. "Every person on our homeworld is depending on this fleet to keep the darkness away from their children. We're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for the future of the human race." The commanders nodded and began discussing tactics. Jake watched them work and felt a surge of pride. These people represented the best of humanity. They would not give up, no matter what came at them from the dark. Lieutenant Commander Steve Johnson crept through space aboard the stealth frigate UES Ghostwalker. His mission was simple in concept but deadly in practice. He needed to get close enough to the approaching void-touched fleet to gather intelligence. Without being detected, the enemy ships were unlike anything in human experience. They looked like living creatures made of darkness and twisted metal. Some were as large as cities, while others moved like schools of fish through the void. They didn't follow the laws of physics that human ships obeyed. They could appear and disappear without warning, phase through solid matter, and bend space around themselves. "Sir, I'm getting readings that don't make sense," said his sensor operator, Petty Officer Carlos Webb. "The enemy formation keeps changing. One moment I count 3,000 ships. The next moment there are 5,000. Steve studied the displays. "They're not just ships. They're something else entirely. Record everything you can. The fleet needs this data." Meanwhile, on the transport ship UES Sanctuary, Major Amy Rodriguez coordinated the evacuation of Mars Colony 7. The Red Planet's last civilian settlement was being abandoned as void-touched scouts appeared in the outer system. "Move faster," she shouted to the loading crews. "We have maybe 2 hours before those things get here." Families hurried up the loading ramps carrying whatever possessions they could manage. Children cried while their parents tried to comfort them. Everyone knew they were leaving their homes forever. Amy watched the radar screen as dark shapes moved between Mars and its moons. The enemy scouts were testing the defenses, probing for weaknesses. Each time one appeared, the automated defense platforms fired at it. Sometimes they hit something, but most of the time their weapons passed through empty space. "Major, we have a problem," called her communications officer. "The enemy is jamming our evacuation signals. Some families can't find the pickup points." Amy grabbed her rifle and headed for the exit. "Keep loading. I'll go find the missing civilians." She ran through the colony's corridors as the lights flickered overhead. The enemy's presence was affecting the power grid. Strange shadows moved along the walls, and she could hear whispers in languages that hurt her mind to understand. Back on the Defiance, Chief Engineer Danny White worked frantically in the ship's main engineering section. Dr. Clark's theories required major modifications to every ship in the fleet. The resonance equipment had to be built from scratch using whatever materials they could find. "This is impossible," muttered his assistant, Engineer First Class Tony Brooks. "We're trying to turn communication arrays into weapons that don't even exist yet." Danny wiped sweat from his forehead. "Dr. Clark says human thoughts can interfere with the enemy's abilities. If she's right, this equipment might let us broadcast our collective consciousness across the entire fleet. And if she's wrong, then we die fighting instead of just dying." The work was complicated by constant alerts as enemy scouts probed the fleet's defenses. Each time the red lights flashed, everyone had to stop what they were doing and prepare for possible attack. Captain Nicole Murphy stood in the flight deck of the carrier UES Liberty and watched her pilots prepare for launch. The fighter squadrons were humanity's eyes and ears in the coming battle. They would have to fly close to the enemy to gather targeting data for the larger ships. "Listen up," she told her squadron leaders. Normal tactics won't work against these things. Energy weapons just feed them and make them stronger. We're switching to kinetic rounds and electromagnetic pulse devices. Wing Leader Patricia Hayes raised her hand. Ma'am, kinetic rounds won't penetrate their hulls. We're not trying to penetrate. We're trying to disrupt their phasing ability. If we can keep them locked in normal space, the big ships can hit them with mass drivers. The pilots nodded and headed to their fighters. Nicole watched them go and wondered how many would come back. She had lost too many good people in the past 20 years on the Ghost Walker. Steve Johnson continued his reconnaissance mission as the enemy fleet grew larger on his screens. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Void Touched weren't just coming to attack Earth. They were bringing something with them. Sir, there's something in the center of their formation, Carlos reported. It's huge. Maybe 10 times bigger than their largest ships? Steve adjusted the sensors for a better look. What he saw defied description. It was like looking at a hole in space itself, but a hole that moved and pulsed with malevolent intelligence. That's not a ship, Steve whispered. That's the thing they use to consume entire star systems. He knew he had to get this information. Back to the fleet, but the enemy was starting to notice his presence. Dark shapes began moving toward the Ghost Walker's position on Mars. Amy Rodriguez found the last group of missing civilians hiding in an abandoned mining tunnel. A family of 5 was huddled together as strange sounds echoed from deeper in the mine. Come on, she urged them. The last transport leaves in 30 minutes. The father, a man named Greg Wilson, shook his head. We can't go out there. We can see them moving in the corridors. They're like living shadows. Amy peered around the corner and saw what he meant. Dark shapes flowed along the walls like liquid, reaching out with tendrils that seemed to test the air for signs of life. Follow me and stay quiet, she whispered. I know another way to the landing pad. She led the family through maintenance tunnels while the enemy searched for them above. The children were terrified but stayed silent. Amy could hear the Void Touched communicating in sounds that made her teeth ache. Back on the Defiance, the fleet conference was ending. Admiral Morrison had given each ship captain their assignments for the coming battle. The plan was desperate, but it was all they had. Remember, Jake told his commanders, we're not trying to win a traditional space battle. We're buying time for Dr. Clark to complete her resonance weapon. Every minute we hold them back increases our chances of success. As the captains returned to their ships, Jake remained on the bridge with Lisa Bennett and Dr. Clark. The scientist was making final adjustments to her equipment, while monitoring reports from across the fleet. Admiral, I'm getting disturbing readings from the outer system, Helen said. The enemy isn't just approaching. They're doing something to the space around them. They're actually draining energy from the vacuum itself. Jake studied her data. What does that mean for us? It means they're not just ships carrying weapons. They're a force of nature that consumes everything in its path. If we can't stop them here, there won't be anywhere left to run. The bridge shook as the Ghost Walkers. Emergency beacon activated. Steve Johnson's ship had been discovered, and he was fighting his way back to the fleet with crucial intelligence about the enemy's true nature. The last human fleet prepared for battle. As darkness approached their final refuge, in a few hours, they would learn whether humanity's greatest strength was enough to stand against the void that threatened to swallow everything they had ever loved. The reports came in like hammer blows to Admiral Morrison's heart. Ceres mining station had gone silent an hour ago. Their final transmission showed workers being absorbed by living shadows that flowed through the facility's corridors like dark. Water. Commander Pete Jackson launched from the heavy cruiser U.S. Steadfast in a desperate rescue mission to Europa Station. He commanded a small squadron of fast attack ships, hoping to reach the ice moon before the Void Touched consumed everyone there. Control, this is Rescue 1, Pete radioed as his ships approached Europa. The station looks intact from the outside, but we're not getting any life signs. Jake listened to the transmission from the Defiance's bridge. He knew what Pete would find, but they had to try. Too many people had already been lost without even attempting to save them. Pete's team docked with Europa Station and entered the main airlock. The facility still had power and atmosphere, but something was terribly wrong. The corridors were empty, but they could hear voices echoing from deeper inside the complex. "Hello?" Pete called out. "Is anyone there?" "This is the Terran Defense. Fleet, we're here to evacuate you." The voices answered, but the words made no sense. They spoke in human languages, but the sentences were jumbled together like broken recordings. Pete's team followed the sounds deeper into the station. They found the source in the main living area. Dozens of people stood in perfect rows, their eyes closed and their mouths moving in unison. They were speaking, but the words belonged to people who had died months ago on other worlds. "My God," whispered Sergeant Linda Chung, Pete's second in command. "The enemy is using their memories." Pete tried to approach one of the people, but his hand passed right through them. They were not really there anymore. The void touched had consumed them and left only echoes behind. Dr. Helen Clark worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the Defiance. Her breakthrough came from studying brainwave patterns of survivors who had encountered the enemy. She discovered that human consciousness created interference that the void touched could not easily digest. "Admiral, I think I understand why we've lasted longer than other species," she told Jake over the intercom. "Human minds are naturally chaotic. We don't think in organized patterns like most intelligent life. The enemy feeds on order and structure, but human thoughts are messy and unpredictable." Jake studied her data on his command screen. "Can we use this against them?" "Yes, but it requires perfect cooperation from every person in the fleet. We need to synchronize our brain waves to create a resonance field that will disrupt their ability to phase between dimensions." While Helen worked on her theories, Captain Karen Thompson led the destroyer UES Relentless in hit-and-run attacks against enemy scout ships. Her crew had learned to use their vessel's mass as a weapon, ramming the dark entities at high speed before they could phase away. "Target acquired," called her weapons officer, Lieutenant Mike Roberts. "It's one of the small ones, about the size of a fighter." "Ram it," Karen ordered. "Full thrust." The Relentless accelerated toward the enemy vessel. At the last second, she could see through the ship's transparent hull to the creature inside. It looked like a collection of shadows held together by malevolent will. The impact scattered it into fragments that dissolved in space. "That's 12 kills today," Mike reported. "But we're taking damage. The hull can't take many more impacts like that." Karen nodded. "Keep fighting. Every enemy ship we destroy is one less that will reach Earth." The refugee transports carrying survivors from the outer colonies finally reached Earth orbit. Colonel Tony Garcia supervised the integration of civilian volunteers into the fleet's crews. Every available person was needed for the coming battle. Among the volunteers was former asteroid miner Bob Lewis. His knowledge of explosives and mining equipment proved valuable as the fleet prepared improvised weapons. Bob worked with Chief Engineer Danny White to turn mining charges into ship-to-ship torpedoes. "These charges were designed to crack open asteroids," Bob explained as they modified the warheads. "Against normal ships, they wouldn't do much damage. But if Dr. Clark is right about the enemy's nature, kinetic shock might disrupt their coherence." Denny watched Bob work and marveled at the man's calm expertise. Here was someone who had lost his home and livelihood but was still fighting to help others. The first major engagement began as the enemy fleet reached the asteroid belt. Captain Susan Taylor commanded a squadron of light cruisers hiding among the floating rocks. Her plan was to use the asteroids themselves as weapons. "All ships, prepare for Operation Slingshot," she broadcast to her squadron. "We're going to give these things a lesson in basic physics." Susan's ships used their tractor beams to grab large asteroids and accelerate them toward the approaching enemy. The rocks moved too fast for the void touch to phase away, and several enemy vessels were destroyed by the impacts. "It's working," reported Captain George Adams from the cruiser UES Hammer. "The kinetic impacts are disrupting their phase ability." But the victory came at a cost. The enemy adapted quickly, sending larger ships that could absorb the asteroid impacts. Susan lost 2 ships before ordering her squadron to retreat to the next defensive line on the Defiance. Jake received reports from across the battle zone. His forces were inflicting damage on the enemy, but they were vastly outnumbered. For every void-touch ship they destroyed, 10 more took its place. "Sir, long-range sensors show the main enemy fleet is still 6 hours out," reported Lisa Bennett. "But their advanced scouts are already engaging our outer perimeter." Jake looked at the tactical display. Red icons representing enemy ships were spreading through the solar system like drops of blood in water. Soon they would reach the inner planets where humanity's last strongholds waited. "What's the status on Dr. Clark's project?" he asked. Lisa checked her datapad. "She says she needs at least 4 more hours to complete the synchronization equipment. The technical challenges are enormous." Jake made a difficult decision. "Signal all ship commanders. We're going to conduct a fighting withdrawal to Mars orbit. We need to buy Helen more time, even if it costs us ships." As his orders were transmitted across the fleet, Jake wondered if he was condemning good people to death for a theory that might not work. But what choice did they have? The alternative was certain extinction for the entire human race. The battle for humanity's survival had begun in earnest. In the cold vacuum between worlds, human courage faced cosmic horror. The outcome would determine whether consciousness and hope could survive in a universe that seemed determined to return everything to darkness. Dr. Clark continued her work, knowing that millions of lives depended on her success. The resonance device was humanity's last hope, but it required something that had never been attempted before. She needed to link the minds of thousands of people across dozens of ships into a single, unified consciousness. Time was running out, and the darkness was getting closer. The main void-touched fleet reached Jupiter, and their true power became clear to the horrified human observers. The massive gas giant began to dim as the enemy drained energy directly from its swirling storms. Lightning that had danced across Jupiter's surface for billions of years flickered and died. Admiral Morrison watched the readings from the Defiance's science station with growing dread. "How much energy are they absorbing?" he asked Dr. Clark. "Enough to power our entire fleet." "For 1,000 years," she replied, her voice shaking. "They're preparing for their final assault by feeding on Jupiter itself." The electromagnetic storms created by the energy drain interfered with human communications across the inner system. Ships had to rely on short-range transmissions and light signals to coordinate their movements. Commander Joe Martinez volunteered to lead a suicide mission into the heart of the enemy formation. His ship, the UES Courage, carried Dr. Clark's first experimental resonance weapon. The device was untested and might destroy his ship along with any nearby enemies. "You don't have to do this," Jake told him over a secure channel. "We can find another way." Joe shook his head. "Sir, my crew and I discussed it. We've all lost family to these things. If there's a chance this weapon can hurt them, we have to try." Jake watched the Courage accelerate toward the enemy fleet. Joe's ship was small and fast, designed for reconnaissance rather than combat. It would have to penetrate deep into the void-touched formation to deploy the weapon effectively. "Courage, this is Control," Jake radioed. "Good luck." "Thank you, sir. It's been an honor serving with you." The Courage disappeared into the dark mass of enemy ships. For several minutes, there was no word from Joe's crew. Then a brilliant flash of light erupted from the center of the enemy formation. The resonance weapon detonated, creating a sphere of disrupted space-time that scattered dozens of void-touched vessels. For a brief moment, the enemy's perfect coordination faltered. Several of their ships collided with each other as their group. Consciousness was disrupted, but the victory was short-lived. The enemy quickly adapted, and Joe Martinez's ship was consumed by the dark entities he had tried to destroy. His sacrifice had wounded the enemy but not stopped them, the loss of the Courage, and its crew sent shockwaves through the human fleet. These were people who had served together for years, fighting impossible odds. Joe's death proved that even their most desperate measures might not be enough. Captain Alice Brown commanded the medical frigate UES Mercy, treating wounded personnel from across the fleet. She noticed something strange about patients who had been exposed to the enemy's influence. Their brainwave patterns showed unusual synchronization. "Doctor, what's happening to them?" asked Nurse Janet Foster as they examined a pilot who had Encountered Void Touch Scouts? Their minds are trying to create harmony, Alice replied. It's like they're unconsciously fighting against the enemy's chaos by working together. Alice began experimenting with group therapy sessions for trauma victims. She discovered that when survivors shared their experiences, their brainwaves began to match each other's patterns. The effects seemed to protect them from further psychological damage. She reported her findings to Dr. Clark, who was amazed by the implications. Captain Brown, you may have discovered the key to making the resonance network work. Human minds naturally synchronize when they're working toward a common goal. Dr. Clark completed her ultimate weapon with help from Alice's research. The consciousness network would connect every human in the fleet into a single harmonized neural pattern. The process was dangerous and required perfect timing, but it represented their only hope. Lieutenant Commander Gary Phillips coordinated the technical implementation across all remaining ships. Working with Chief Engineer Danny White, they modified every vessel's communication array to carry neural patterns instead of just voice and data. This is completely theoretical, Gary warned the engineering teams. We're asking people to link their minds together in a way that's never been attempted. We don't know what the side effects might be. Danny nodded grimly. The alternative is extinction. I think most people will take unknown risks over certain death. The installation work required teams to work outside their ships in the vacuum of space. Enemy scouts continuously harassed the maintenance crews, forcing fighter squadrons to provide constant protection. Wing leader Chris Parker led his pilots in desperate battles to protect the engineers. His squadron had been reduced to half strength, but they continued flying missions even when their fighters were barely functional. Control, this is Eagle Leader, Chris radioed during one engagement. We've got multiple enemy contacts moving toward the Defiance. They're trying to stop the network installation. Copy, Eagle Leader. All available fighters, protect the flagship. Chris led his remaining pilots in a head-on attack against the approaching Void Touch scouts. The enemy ships moved like living things, twisting and flowing through space in patterns that hurt to watch. Remember, kinetic weapons only, Chris ordered his squadron. Energy weapons just make them stronger. The battle was fierce but brief. Chris lost 2 more pilots, but the enemy scouts were driven away from the Defiance. The network installation continued. Though time was running desperately short as the modifications neared completion, Dr. Clark began testing the system with small groups of volunteers. The first attempts were frightening. When people's minds linked together, they experienced shared memories and emotions that were overwhelming. Petty Officer Sandra Kim was one of the test subjects. Doctor, it's like having a dozen people thinking inside your head at the same time. How can anyone function like this? The initial confusion is normal, Helen assured her. But notice how you can sense what your teammates are feeling. You know, their intentions before they speak. That kind of coordination could be incredibly powerful in battle. The enemy fleet completed their feeding on Jupiter and began their final approach toward Earth. Their ships had grown larger and more complex, fed by the gas giant's energy. Some were now the size of small moons, bristling with dark weapons that bent space around them. Admiral Morrison called his surviving ship commanders to a final conference. Only 31 vessels remained operational. They faced an enemy fleet that numbered in the thousands. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our last chance, Jake told them. Dr. Clark's consciousness network is ready for deployment. In 2 hours, we'll attempt to link every human mind in the fleet into a single coordinated intelligence. Captain Nicole Murphy raised her hand. Sir, what if the process fails? What if linking our minds together damages us permanently? Jake looked around the room at the tired faces of his commanders. Then we'll face that together too. We've come this far by refusing to give up. I'm not going to start doubting humanity now. The commanders returned to their ships to prepare their crews for the unprecedented experiment. Across the fleet, people said goodbye to loved ones and made peace with the possibility that they might not survive the consciousness linking. Dr. Clark made final adjustments to the network while monitoring the approaching enemy. The Void Touched had learned from their encounter with the Courage. They were spreading their formation to make it harder for humans to attack their core ships. "Admiral, the enemy will reach our defensive perimeter in 90 minutes, she reported. "We need to activate the network soon or we won't have enough. Time for it to reach full synchronization." Jake nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, all personnel, this is Admiral Morrison. In 30 minutes, we're going to attempt something that has never been done before. We're going to link our minds together to create a weapon powered by human consciousness itself." He paused, looking out at the approaching darkness. "I won't lie to you, this might not work. But I believe in the human spirit. I believe in our refusal to surrender. And I believe that together we can face anything the universe throws at us." The countdown began as humanity prepared for its final gamble against the darkness. The consciousness network activated across the human fleet with a sensation like lightning running through everyone's minds. Thousands of people suddenly found themselves connected to each other in ways they had never imagined possible. Fear, hope, determination, and love flowed between them like electrical current. Admiral Morrison felt the minds of his crew linking with his own thoughts. For a terrifying moment, he experienced the memories of every person on the Defiance. He saw childhood homes on distant worlds, felt the grief of those who had lost family to the Void Touched, and shared the fierce determination that kept them all fighting. "Network synchronization at 60% and rising," Dr. Clark reported, her voice echoing strangely through both sound and thought. "The neural resonance is building faster than I expected." The effects spread beyond individual ships as the fleet's communication arrays carried the consciousness patterns from vessel to vessel. Captain Frank Miller felt his mind connect with crews he had never met. On the heavy cruiser UES Thunderbolt, his thoughts merged with thousands of others into something larger than any individual human intelligence. "This is incredible," he whispered, speaking simultaneously through his voice and through the network itself. "I can feel what everyone is thinking." The Void-Touched fleet responded to the change immediately. Their dark ships began moving in, agitated patterns as if they sensed something they had never encountered before. The entities that had consumed countless civilizations were facing a form of consciousness they could not understand or digest. Commander Beth Adams coordinated the fighter wings through the mental link. Her pilots no longer needed radio communications. They flew as a single organism, each ship responding to threats that others detected. Wing leader Chris Parker found that he could anticipate his squadron's movements before they happened. "Control, this is Eagle Leader," Chris broadcast through both radio and thought. "The enemy is acting differently. They're pulling back from our forward positions." The mental network created unexpected side effects. Crew members began experiencing shared memories that strengthened their emotional bonds. Engineer First Class Tony Brooks found himself remembering the childhood of a woman on another ship while she experienced his memories of growing up on Mars. "The barriers between individual minds are breaking down," Dr. Clark observed. "But instead of creating chaos, it's making us stronger. The shared consciousness is more than the sum of its parts." Captain Lynn Davis commanded the cruiser UES Stalwart at the leading edge of the human formation. Through the network she could feel the determination of every person in the fleet flowing through her thoughts. When Void-Touched assault ships attacked her position, she responded with tactics that came from the combined experience of dozens of commanders. "All ships, execute synchronized attack pattern 7, she ordered through the mental link. The entire fleet moved as one, their weapons firing in perfect coordination. The resonance weapons, powered by the collective human consciousness, proved devastatingly effective against the enemy. Beams of organized thought struck the Void-Touched ships and disrupted their ability to maintain coherence in normal space. Dark entities that had seemed invincible began to dissolve under the assault, but the battle came at a terrible cost. The UES Stalwart took heavy damage from enemy return fire. Captain Davis felt her ship dying around her, but the network connection allowed her crew to continue fighting even as their vessel broke apart. "Stalwart going down," she reported calmly, through the mental link. "Our sacrifice strengthens the network. Use our final moments to push harder." As the Stalwart exploded, the consciousness patterns of its crew flowed into the network, adding their strength to the collective human intelligence. Death became not an ending but a transformation, with each lost crew member contributing their knowledge and determination to those who remained. The enemy flagship, a massive entity that looked like a living shadow the size of a small moon, began to respond to the network's assault. It pulsed with malevolent intelligence, trying to find a way to corrupt or consume the human consciousness that was damaging its fleet. Dr. Clark monitored the network's stability as the battle intensified. "Admiral, the enemy is trying to infiltrate our mental connection. I'm detecting probes that feel like ice in the mind." Jake Morrison, his thoughts now part of the greater human consciousness, responded with the voice of thousands. "All personnel, maintain focus. Remember who we are and what we're fighting for. Don't let the darkness into your thoughts." The mental battle became as important as the physical one. Void-touched entities tried to plant despair and hopelessness in human minds, while the network responded with memories of everything worth protecting. Children playing on distant worlds, lovers separated by war, parents who had died defending their families. All of these emotions became weapons against the cosmic horror. Captain Matt Turner of the cruiser UES Vengeance led a coordinated assault on the enemy's forward elements. His ship and 5 others moved in perfect synchronization, their crews thinking as one. The attack was so precisely coordinated that it seemed like a dance of destruction. "Network efficiency at 95%, Dr. Clark announced. We're approaching full consciousness integration." The effect was beyond anything she had theorized. The human fleet was becoming a single organism with dozens of bodies. Each ship remained independent, but was guided by the collective wisdom and determination of every crew member. Commander Kelly Wright discovered something remarkable during the battle. The enemy's retreat was not just tactical. "Admiral, they're sealing dimensional rifts as they withdraw. The network is not just repelling them, it's preventing them from returning to this region of space." The realization sent waves of hope through the connected consciousness. They were not just winning a battle, they were creating a permanent defense against the void touched. Human thought patterns were becoming a barrier that the enemy could not cross. Wing Leader Patricia Hayes led her surviving fighters in pursuit of retreating enemy scouts. Through the network, she could anticipate their movement patterns and intercept them before they could escape. "The enemy is losing coherence," she reported. "They can't maintain formation when exposed to our synchronized consciousness." The battle reached its climax as the massive enemy flagship attempted one final assault. The shadow entity turned all of its power against the human fleet, trying to break their mental connection through sheer force of will, but the network held. Thousands of human minds, linked together by shared purpose and mutual support, proved stronger than the cosmic horror that had devoured galaxies. The flagship's attack was absorbed and turned back on itself, disrupting the creature's own consciousness. Admiral Morrison felt the moment of victory through every connected mind in the fleet. The enemy flagship began to collapse in on itself, its dark energy dispersing into harmless radiation. Across the battle zone, void-touched vessels were retreating toward the edge of the solar system. "All ships maintain pursuit," Jake ordered through the network. "Don't let them regroup." The human fleet advanced as one, their consciousness network growing stronger with each passing moment. What had begun as a desperate last stand was becoming a triumphant advance against an enemy that had seemed invincible. For the first time in 20 years, humanity was winning. The consciousness network reached perfect synchronization as the last void-touched vessels fled toward the edge of the solar system. Every human mind in the fleet was connected in harmony, creating a resonance field that filled the space between worlds with the power of unified thought. Admiral Morrison experienced the moment of complete victory through thousands of connected minds. The enemy flagship had collapsed into itself, leaving only fading energy patterns that dispersed like smoke in the void. Across the entire battle zone, the creatures that had devoured galaxies were retreating in disorder. Network stability at maximum, Dr. Clark reported, her voice carrying the joy of every person in the fleet. The resonance field is holding steady. The enemy cannot maintain coherence in its presence. Captain Matt Turner led the final pursuit aboard the cruiser Use Vengeance. His ship and the remaining vessels of the fleet moved with perfect coordination, their crews thinking as one organism. The void-touched vessels that had seemed so terrifying now fled like shadows before dawn. Admiral, long-range sensors show the enemy is not just retreating, Turner reported through the mental link. They're sealing the dimensional rifts they used to enter our space. They're making sure they can never return to this region. The realization sent waves of profound relief through the connected consciousness. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had created a permanent barrier against cosmic horror. The synchronized human minds had become something the void, touched, could not overcome or understand. Commander Kelly Wright made another discovery that amazed everyone in the network. Sir, I'm detecting energy signatures from dead solar systems. The places the enemy consumed are showing signs of returning to normal space-time. Dr. Clark analyzed the data flowing through the network and confirmed Kelly's findings. The resonance field is having effects far beyond our solar system. By forcing the void touch to retreat, we've disrupted their influence across this entire region of the galaxy. As the enemy finished their withdrawal, the consciousness network began to slowly disconnect. The process was gradual and gentle, unlike the overwhelming rush of the initial connection. People found themselves becoming individuals again, but they retained the memory of perfect unity. Admiral Morrison felt the other minds gradually separating from his own thoughts. The experience left him feeling strangely empty, as if he had lost family members. But he also felt stronger than before, knowing that he carried part of everyone else's courage within himself. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, he broadcast. On normal communication channels. The enemy has been defeated. Begin rescue and recovery operations. Captain Roy Phillips of the reconnaissance ship UES Pathfinder led the survey missions to assess the battle's aftermath. What his sensors showed seemed impossible after 20 years of losing to the void touched. Control, this is Pathfinder, Roy reported. Long-range scans show multiple star systems that were previously consumed are beginning to show normal energy signatures. It's like the enemy's influence is being reversed. The implications were staggering. Dead worlds that had been dark for decades were showing signs of returning to life. Solar systems that had been drained of energy were beginning to shine. Again, as their stars reignited, Dr. Clark worked frantically to analyze the phenomenon. Admiral, I think I understand what happened. The consciousness network didn't just repel the enemy, it created a cascade effect that's healing the damage they caused across multiple star systems. Jake Morrison looked out at the scattered remains of the enemy fleet drifting in space. Dark metal that had once seemed alive was now just debris, no more threatening than any other wreckage. How is that possible? Human consciousness operates on quantum principles that are fundamentally opposed to the void-touched nature, Helen explained. When we achieved perfect synchronization, we created a pattern that cancels out their influence on reality itself. The surviving ships of the human fleet began the long process of returning to Earth. Their hulls were battered and their crews were exhausted, but their spirits had never been higher. They had stood against cosmic horror and emerged victorious. Captain Alice Brown of the medical frigate UES Mercy coordinated treatment for the wounded while studying the aftereffects of the consciousness connection. She discovered that people who had been part of the network showed enhanced empathy and cooperation. Doctor, the psychological changes appear to be permanent, Nurse Janet Foster reported. Everyone who experienced the mental link is showing increased emotional intelligence and better teamwork abilities. Alice nodded thoughtfully. The network connection has changed us. We're still individuals, but we understand each other in ways we never did before. As the fleet approached Earth, they received communications from the home world. The planet's defense stations reported that the dark energy clouds that had surrounded the solar system for months were dissipating. Stars that had been hidden were becoming visible again. "Welcome home," came the message from Earth Defense Command. Long-range sensors confirm that the enemy presence throughout human space is collapsing. Colonies that went dark are beginning to transmit again. Admiral Morrison addressed the fleet one final time as they entered Earth orbit. "Ladies and gentlemen, we accomplished something that seemed impossible. We stood against darkness that had consumed entire galaxies, and we won. But more than that, we discovered something about ourselves that we never knew before." He paused, looking out at the blue and white world that had given birth to their species. "We learned that our greatest strength is not our technology or our weapons. It's our ability to stand together, to share our thoughts and dreams, and to refuse surrender, even when everything seems hopeless." The consciousness network had permanently changed humanity. While the direct mental connection was gone, people retained an enhanced ability to understand and cooperate with each other. The experience of perfect unity had left them stronger as individuals and as a species. Dr. Clark began work on plans to maintain a permanent version of the resonance field around human space. "We need to ensure that nothing like the void touched can ever threaten us again," she told the Admiral. The network technology could be adapted to create a defensive barrier around all human worlds. Captain Roy Phillips reported more good news from his long-range surveys. "Admiral, we're detecting signs of intelligent life in systems that were previously consumed. It appears that species the enemy destroyed are somehow being restored along with their worlds." The victory had implications that reached far beyond humanity's survival. By defeating the void touched, they had saved countless other civilizations and restored balance to their region of the galaxy. As the fleet settled into Earth orbit, Jake Morrison reflected on the cost of their victory. They had lost good people, including heroes like Joe Martinez and Lynn Davis, whose sacrifice had made victory possible. But their deaths had not been in vain. The last human fleet had stood against the darkness and won. More importantly, they had discovered that consciousness itself, the ability to think, feel, and dream together, was a force that could overcome any horror the universe might contain. Earth's sun shone brightly through the bridge windows of the Defiance, no longer dimmed by the enemy's influence. The darkness had been defeated, and humanity looked toward a future where they would never again face extinction alone. They had learned that their thoughts and dreams, when shared in unity, were the most powerful weapons in the universe. The war was over, and the light had won.